welcome to another edition of Did You Know Doctor Who? We're on episode 90, can you believe it? This time we're going to have a look at The Invasion. I hope you enjoy. This serial marks the first ever appearance of UNIT. Originally, The Invasion was going to be a 6-part story called Return of the Cybermen. It was renamed to The Invasion to keep the Cybermen a secret. The character of Professor Travers, who appeared in 2 earlier Yeti stories, was to appear for a 3rd time, but the decision was made to replace him with Professor Watkins, as using him would involve paying Mervyn Haseman and Henry Lincoln, who were against their characters' usage after a disagreement over the rewrites of the Dominators conducted without their approval, although Travers was still referred to by name several times. Wendy Patbury does not appear in episode 3 as she was on holiday. Fraser Hines was on schedule break during the last episode, but did appear in a pre-recorded film insert in the conclusion. This is the first Doctor Who story to be filmed out of order. This was due to the improved videotape editing technology. Due to director Douglas Camfield's refusal to use regular composer Dudley Simpson, Don Harper was hired to do the music for this serial. It would be Harper's only work with Doctor Who. Originally, another story called The Dream Spinner was to take this story's placement. The Dream Spinner was plot concerned an individual who could make people believe their dreams were real. However, the story felt too similar to The Mind Robber, and the budget had practically run out, meaning The Invasion was given more parts and The Space Pirates was also conceived. This story makes debut as Terence Dix as script editor and his first credited contribution to the series. Together with The Web of Fear, this story was sort of a test run for a format switch. For the next 2 or 3 seasons, most stories would feature the Doctor working with UNIT to protect humanity on a more or less modern-day Earth, as opposed to flying around onto different planets or visiting different time locations. It was during filming of this story that Fraser Hines announced his intention to leave the series. A black and white shot of a Cyberman with 2 others behind walking down the steps of St. Peter's Hill with the St. Paul's Cathedral in the background accompanied the Radio Times programme listing for episode 1, bearing the title Invasion, with the accompanying caption, Doctor Who starts a new adventure today at 5:15. One will bring him face to face with some of his deadliest enemies, the Cybermen. This effectively ruined the surprise setup for episode 4. This story was intended to prove that Earth-based stories could be produced cheaply and effectively. Ironically, it was the most expensive Doctor Who story ever produced when made, and remained so for several years. This is the first incomplete serial since the Celestial Toymaker, for which no telesnaps are known to exist. The Cybermats were to have appeared in this story. An action scene where UNIT recaptures Professor Watkins had to be abandoned because there wasn't enough time to film it, but it was reinstated by Ian Marter for the novelisation. A scene in which Gregory is killed by the Cybermen in the sewers also had been inserted into the same episode because the character was originally shot by Benton during the battle. Rutledge was originally supposed to be forced into shooting himself by Valg. It was filmed but was cut before broadcast, presumably because it was too dark for family viewing, and is now currently lost. Ian Marter's novelisation reinstates the scene. According to Fraser Hines, Sally Falker's skirt kept blowing up around her neck while climbing up the rope ladder to the helicopter. To avoid the same thing happening to his kilt, he remembered reading somewhere that the Queen had lead weights sewn into her helm of the skirt to stop this from happening to her. It so happened that Fraser's dresser was a keen fisherman who sewed some lead weights into his kilt. This is the only 8-part story in the show's history, and is one of the longest stories overall. The Cyber Director was a modified version of the prop used for the Cyber Planner in The Wheel in Space. This was the first Cyberman story to not have any involvement from Kit Pedler. The servo robot from The Wheel in Space was supposed to make a cameo appearance where it would have emerged from within the Cyber Director to confront Tobias Valg. This is also the first appearance of Benton. Isabel was originally touted as becoming a regular companion, hence her larger than average role in this story. This story was voted as the 32nd best story in 2003. In the weeks between this story and the last were made and broadcast, the TARDIS prop was borrowed along with 3 Dalek props for the use in another BBC science fiction show called Out of the Unknown. The TARDIS prop was renovated at the cost of borrowing production and slightly modified. The modification is the inclusion of the phone box on the right door. Coincidentally, the previous serial, The Mind Robber, had itself borrowed props from Out of the Unknown, as the robots that patrolled the land of fiction had also appeared in that series. This is the first appearance of the so-called box head design for the Cybermen, becoming the most recognisable and marketed design of the Cybermen. Despite this is the only appearance on screen, discounting the head that appears in later reboot stories such as Death in Heaven. And that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed. The Invasion is a very long story, but unlike other long stories, I feel like this one is perfectly in length. The problem with a lot of the longer stories is that there's several parts which are not really needed. Even the War Games, as great as that is, has a few parts which just feel like they're unnecessary. They could have just had like one line to resolve it. But this feels like, despite its 8 parts, every part is needed. It's really, really good. The Invasion is a fantastic story. It's one of the most iconic Cybermen stories. It is kind of funny to think that the story actually got spoilt back in the day by Radio Times. But then again, like, if you're filming out in broad daylight with a bunch of Cybermen walking about, I'm sure people are probably going to catch on. I will say this, there are a few iffy, not so well-aged parts to this story. One of the biggest is the lack of people in London while the Cybermen are invading. I felt like that was kind of weird. Even the Cybermen kind of get defeated very quickly in this. Despite this, I love the look of the Cybermen. The Cyberman look is massively improved from the previous. Now, obviously, the Mondasian Cybermen were, they really are the best in my opinion. But then second versions, I've never been a fan of the bucket head look. I really don't like the bucket head look. But the more box head design, I love it so much. It's a shame they only ever used it once in story, on TV, I should say, because they've used it loads of times in merchandise, in the audiobooks. It's like the default Cyberman look almost, and even the upgraded version later on. And the upgraded versions later on in Revenge of the Cybermen, and it's some bigger story I'm thinking of, and the other one was Earthshock. They still kept that design more or less. They just sort of added a few more extra bits. I just really love the look of the Cybermen in the story. It's just such a gorgeous design. It's such a magnificent look to them, and I love how, even as bad as the Chris Chibnall Doctor Who stories are, I love that he did bring back that design sort of with his Cybermen look. I just think it's such a brilliant, iconic design almost. As the story goes, it's a very good story. I think it's certainly action-packed. I mean, there's that scene where the Doctor's running, you see all these blasts all around him. I think that's such a wonderful moment. The unit being there fighting against the Cybermen, I think it's such a great story. And this is such an iconic story. Is it one of the Second Doctor's best? Probably. It's probably in the top 10, but I wouldn't say in the top 5. I'm just going to say that right now. Maybe the bottom 10, like 10, 9, around there, perhaps. But overall, it's still a fantastic story. It's still a brilliant story, and it's one to look out for. It's maybe 8 parts, but unlike other very, very long stories, the parts make sense in this case. Hope you enjoyed this edition of Did You Know Doctor Who, and I'll see you next time.